As I sat down to write this, a little while ago I was asked to come and give this speech, and as I sat down to write this, I could hear my daughter, there she is, playing in the next room with her dolls, and I was really overcome with emotion. And it was an enormous sense of gratitude, I think, at the second chance I had been given. I started thinking about all these things that I had been taken for granted, putting her in the tub, taking her out to the bus, rushing her out the door to catch her bus, more like it, bringing down the laundry, cooking. All of these things are things that I couldn't do 4 years ago. And every now and then, when I'm tired or frustrated, and that happens quite often, I think about how desperately I wanted to be able to do these things 4 years ago. And it calms me down. So I'm going to go back and tell you a little bit about me. My name is Whitney. And I had my first seizure when I was 19. Although it wasn't my first seizure. I just thought it was. It turns out I'd been having seizures since I was 13, but I just didn't know it. I had been having these what are called simple partial seizures, and in me, they manifested with a small disturbance in my field of vision that lasted for about 5 to 10 seconds. I had mentioned these to my GP, who sent me to see an optometrist who prescribed me glasses. It turns out I needed these glasses. I was nearsighted, but they didn't stop these little episodes from occurring. So then when I was 19, I had my first tonic-clonic, or what you may have heard as a grand mal seizure, and I was diagnosed with epilepsy. I was given my first anti-epileptic medication, and I lost my license for my first time. All this happened when I was in university, and despite the hugeness of this diagnosis, I was surprisingly okay. Unfortunately, the anti-epileptic medication didn't really work with me. I have some underlying health issues. So we switched out to another medication. And although this medication controlled my seizures, I still wasn't okay with it. So another switch occurred. And yet again, I was not okay. A third switch. This medication was okay, and I'm still on it today. Unfortunately, these switches meant what I had was considered drug-resistant epilepsy. A study done at Glasgow's Western Infirmary looked at drug-resistant epilepsy in adults. In 1,098 patients, 49%, which is 513 patients, experienced seizure control with their first medication. A further 13%, or 136 patients, had seizure control with their second medication. Only 4% had seizure control with their third medication. So basically, this just means that the more medications you're on, the less chance you're going to have of seizure control. And that was me. The more medications I was on, the less chance I was going to have of ever having seizure control on medications. So on this third medication, I coped. I think I managed. I just continued with day-to-day life. You know, I finished school, I got a job, I got married, we got our first mortgage, and then the inevitable question of wanting a baby came up. At first, my neurologist said no. These little episodes or seizures I was having, even though they were infrequent, and you had to know me really well to even tell if I was having a seizure, they were too frequent for my neurologist to give us the green light. She wanted to see nocturnal or nighttime seizures only for at least a few months leading up to say yes, leading up for a few months to say yes. So what do? My triggers, which I knew by this point really well, were sleep deprivation and stress. So we tried a few different things, change habits, change my lifestyle a little bit. We really wanted to have a baby. And sure enough, we got there in the end. I had 3 months of nocturnal only, simple partials only for 3 months. We got the go-ahead, and we got pregnant the same day. No lie. My first pregnancy with our son was actually really uneventful, which is a good thing. I remember being very nervous that I was going to have a seizure during birth. That was my biggest fear. I don't know why, but that was it, and I clung to it. But despite all the fear, I didn't, and he was perfect. I felt like I could do everything as a mom. Things were going so well until he was 5 weeks old. And then one morning, after the morning feed, instead of waking up my husband to put him back in his cot, which was 5 feet away from our bed, I decided to be a really good wife and do it myself. And I had a seizure. I dropped our baby on his head, and he suffered a hairline fracture of the skull. He's okay, by the way. He's fine. He's 7 years old, and he's perfect. But at the time, I felt like the worst mother, the worst person, the worst wife on the planet. You know, this little baby who depended on me for everything. I had let him down. So from then on, this is his first birthday. I carried him for over a year in that sling, everywhere. I was determined never to drop him again, ever, and I didn't. I mean, I know I've got a beer in the picture, but honestly, he was fine. So where did things go wrong? Well, over time, and I'm not really, sure if I can point to a specific time, really, but my seizures changed. And I know that our brains change. That's just a fact. But I can point to a certain time, I guess. Shortly after this picture was taken, I got pregnant with our daughter. And it could be the increase in my blood levels during the pregnancy or the hormone changes in my pregnancy. But I do know that my seizures became more frequent and they changed. About halfway through my pregnancy, I started to have what is called drop seizures, where I would just drop without any warning at any given time. And it might not sound that bad, but a pregnant woman falling dead weight in public on the pavement was a cause for concern, especially for my husband and for the baby. But the baby actually ended up being fine because she was cocooned in this nice womb. So around that time, this happened. I know she's born already, but this is the only picture I have with the helmet. I really hated that helmet so much. There are hardly any pictures in it. I fought this helmet. I fought it. I did not want it. I really didn't. It was actually Michael J. Fox, bringing him up again, but Michael J. Fox convinced me to get the helmet, not my husband or my mother or my siblings or any of their pleadings after so long. I was reading his second book, Always Looking Up, which is incredible, and I recommend it to anyone in this room. And in it, he says that having a disability means having to throw self-consciousness out the window. And that really, really stuck me. It made me accept my circumstances and accept that I was no longer this independent person anymore. I was a mother, and I needed that helmet, and I needed help. After Lillian was born, things went from bad to worse and fast. In order to get the sleep I so desperately needed, my husband moved into the nursery with her, but kept the baby monitor on me in order to monitor my seizures. It was not a good time. I had, when she was 3 weeks old, I suffered from a cluster of 7 tonic-clonic seizures in a 48-hour period. I'd maybe had 5 or 6 before in my entire life. These seizures are exhausting, and every muscle in your body aches, and I have a tendency to lose control of my bladder. It's not very pretty. I need to say these seizures are also psychologically traumatizing, and they're just, in general, really scary. You have absolutely zero control of your body, and that's really terrifying. And when they're finished, you're left with a fear that they can happen again at any time, and you just don't know when that's going to be. So after this cluster happened, I was put on an emergency medication. I use the term emergency because it's not standardly used as a go-to. You can be put on at a high dose straight away. And it was great. It stopped the seizures. However, I was highly allergic to it, and I ended up in the hospital for a few weeks. My daughter was only a few weeks old, and there was a superbug going around the hospital at the time, so I was unable to see them. At this point, it was decided to see if I was a surgical candidate. I was so happy to hear this news, but I didn't hold my breath. I knew the chances were remote. But I was willing to go into the epilepsy monitoring unit and see. For those of you who don't know about an epilepsy monitoring unit, it's a pretty cool place. It's a secured 24-hour facility where you're monitored 24/7 with audio, video, and EEG. And seizures are induced usually by reduction in medication. And tests are done, and the entire neuro team works together. You're there until you have enough seizures and they have enough data. I was there twice. The first time in December 2009 for just under a week, and the second time for my surgeries. And I'm going to play you a video now from my first visit in December 2009. And at the start of the video, I'm having a seizure. So it's, and this is pretty typical of my seizures at this time.
She's going through one, by the way, if you want to know. She's doing one. Well, I don't know if she did or not. I don't know if she pressed it or not.
No. I pressed it.
She did press it.
I pressed it.
Oh, good.
I pressed it again.
Just because the last time I was here, she couldn't do it.
I pressed it.
It didn't, so
I did press it.
That was my father that you heard. And those machines where we used to wear these packs that you would press a button every time you were having a seizure. And I also noticed when I was going through these hours of tapes of me having seizures that I always laughed at the end of each seizure. And apologized, which was extremely disconcerting. The second time I was in the epilepsy monitoring unit was roughly a year later, in November of 2010, and my quality of life had deteriorated quite a bit. In between the year that I was there, I was no longer able to use the toilet by myself. I needed help bathing. I wasn't able to cook. Knives and stoves were considered too dangerous. I wasn't able to hold my children unless someone handed them to me and I was sitting. When I was at home, I was confined to a bed or a wheelchair. So anyway, I was back here at this time for the surgery and this is the video, I am actually on the phone to my dad at this point, and well.
Wake me up and you need to see all of them on makes you feel better. That I can't talk. Hello. Whitney? Mm-hmm. Right? Whitney? Mm-hmm. You're Whitney? Mm-hmm. That's Whitney. Mm-hmm.
So it's been roughly a year. And then this one, when I come back in 2010, my neurosurgeon, I haven't actually had my second surgery here. I've had one surgery. What he's done when I first arrived is he's decided to investigate deeper. If you notice in the first video, we have the electrodes glued onto my skull and they're trying to see what's going on. With this one, they've given me a craniotomy. We've gone inside and they've implanted a grid directly onto the brain to see when I have the seizures, what's going on a little bit more. It's called a subdural EEG. And you can also see that my seizures have changed a little bit. That's what I noticed too. This machine was also brought out. We did some tests with this. And this machine stimulated areas of the brain and sent electrical impulses to the grid and the electrodes that were in the brain. And he would ask me repeatedly, do you feel anything? And I would answer repeatedly, no. And then all of a sudden when he would stimulate one area of the grid, instead of saying no, an answer of, I see a floating cube would come up, or I feel something in my leg. It was actually quite cool. And it was also, it was helping him figure out what areas needed to be operated on or not operated on for, steer clear of that area. So one night after 3 weeks of me being there, he walked into my room and said that they could do the surgery the next morning if I wanted it. The surgery involved removing damaged tissue from the right parietal lobe. And I was told the risks would be loss of peripheral vision or impairment to my left side. We didn't know how much until he was in there. And we were thinking a 20 to 60% reduction in my seizure activity. And I was having, when I went in there, 5 to 7 seizures a day. So you might think it wasn't a tough decision, like, of course, go in, do it, of course. But he wanted an answer right away. And my husband and I had decided that we would make this decision together. And I had just been released from the ICU the week before. So, but we couldn't wait. I had this grid that had been on my brain for 3 weeks, and it needed to come out. So it was going to come out the next day. And I was never going to have a third brain surgery. I can tell you that. I mean, Andy was here saying, brain surgery is not that big a deal. His brain surgery wasn't that big a deal. My brain surgery was a huge deal. I was not going to have a third one. And they were going to be in there already, removing the grid. So the answer was yes. On Thursday, November 25th, 2010, I went in for successful resection, where they removed as much as a small tangerine from my right parietal lobe during an 8.5-hour surgery. I've been seizure-free ever since. Yes, it hurt. And the recovery was not easy. But was it worth it? Yes. This surgery gave me my life back, and I am so grateful. It's obviously not an option for everyone, and not every surgery has the same outcome as mine. But I came out of this surgery feeling the need to make a difference. And if we can increase the awareness of this surgery and other treatment options, that can make a difference. I will continue to do my best to raise awareness and give a voice to patients with drug-resistant epilepsy. And it's my ongoing wish that everyone experience a seizure-free future. Thank you.